Title: Why This Tiny Florida Town's Seafood is Worth More Than Gold. Welcome back to Wanderlust Revealed. When you think of the best seafood in America, I bet your mind goes straight to lobster from Maine, crab from Maryland, or maybe salmon from the Pacific Northwest. You're picturing bustling harbors and famous restaurants, right? Well, what if I told you you're looking in all the wrong places? What if the real treasure isn't on any tourist map? What if it's hidden away, on a quiet stretch of coastline that time seems to have forgotten? It's here, in a tiny town on Florida's forgotten coast, where the seafood is worth more than gold, and its story, well, that's even richer. The Forgotten Coast. This is Apalachicola, Florida. The name comes from its original inhabitants, and it translates to Land of the Friendly People. It feels like a world away from the theme parks and packed beaches that define so much of Florida. Here, the roads are lined with ancient oaks dripping in Spanish moss, and historic homes whisper stories of a time long past. This isn't just a town, it's a feeling. It's the last real piece of what they call Old Florida. But don't let the sleepy vibe fool you. This place has a dramatic past. Before railroads crisscrossed the South, Apalachicola was a giant of commerce. Its location right at the mouth of a massive river system made it the third busiest port on the entire Gulf of Mexico. Cotton and timber flowed through here, building fortunes and a city that was once a boomtown, a hub of wealth and influence. But then, the world changed. Railroads diverted the flow of goods, and the Civil War brought blockades that choked its lifeline. Apalachicola faded from the national stage. The boom went bust, and the town settled into a quiet rhythm. It became, in a word, forgotten. But in that quiet, something else was growing, a new identity, a new treasure that came directly from the Bay, the treasure of the Bay. For over a century, Apalachicola was known for one thing. It was the oyster capital of the world. Now that isn't just a proud local nickname. It was a statistical fact. These waters, this specific bay, produced over 90% of all oysters in Florida, and an incredible 10% of all oysters eaten in the entire country. So what made them so special? It was the magic of the estuary. The Apalachicola River carries fresh water from hundreds of miles north and dumps it right here into the Gulf of Mexico, creating a perfect, delicate mix of fresh and salt water. This brackish cocktail, protected by a chain of barrier islands, was the ideal habitat, the perfect terroir for oysters. It gave them a unique, legendary flavor you couldn't find anywhere else on Earth. It was the taste of Apalachicola Bay, the men who harvest the gold. You can't tell the story of the Apalachicola oyster without telling the story of the oystermen. For generations, this wasn't just a job, it was a way of life, passed from father to son. Long before dawn, they'd head out onto the bay in their flat-bottomed skiffs. They didn't use modern industrial dredges. The harvest here was done by hand, with long scissor-like tongs that have been used for centuries. It's a rhythmic, back-breaking dance. Sink the tongs, feel for an oyster bed, scrape the bottom, and haul the heavy, dripping baskets back to the surface. It's a craft that takes patience, strength, and an intimate knowledge of the bay's every secret. These watermen were the guardians of the bay. They understood its rhythms, its moods, its health, because their lives depended on it. This deep connection between the people and the water forged a culture built on hard work, independence, and a profound respect for the nature that provided for them. The wealth of this town wasn't just measured in dollars, it was measured in the pride of a community built around this amazing natural bounty. The fall of an empire. But then, the unthinkable happened. The empire started to crumble. It wasn't one single event, but a slow, creeping disaster. For years, a water war had been raging between Florida, Georgia, and Alabama over the river that feeds the bay. As Atlanta's thirst for water grew, the flow of fresh water downstream slowed to a trickle. The bay got saltier. That subtle shift in chemistry was a catastrophe. The higher salinity allowed oyster predators and diseases to thrive. Then came a series of knockout punches. A severe drought in 2012, market fears after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and the brutal destruction of Hurricane Michael in 2018. The oyster population, once seemingly endless, crashed. The harvest collapsed. Oystermen who once brought in hundreds of dollars a day were lucky to make 20. By 2020, things were so bad that state officials made a heartbreaking call. They shut down all wild oyster harvesting in Apalachicola Bay. The fishery was closed until at least the end of 2025. The heart of the town's economy, its very soul, had stopped beating. For most towns, that would have been the end of the story. A final tragic chapter. But this is the Forgotten Coast, a place built by people who know how to weather a storm. This is where the story gets really good. The closure wasn't an admission of defeat. It was a declaration of war, a war to save their bay, an act of resilience. The community rallied. This wasn't just about saving an industry, it was about saving their soul. A massive multi-million-dollar restoration effort kicked off, funded by settlement money from the oil spill. Scientists, oystermen, and locals all banded together. They started the painstaking work of restoring the historic oyster beds, using materials like lime rock to create new habitats. Armies of researchers began monitoring the bay like never before. The oystermen, forced off the water, didn't give up. They became the most critical partners in the restoration, their generational knowledge guiding the science. After all, they knew where the old reefs were, how the currents moved, and what a healthy bay was supposed to look and feel like. And now, there's real hope on the horizon. Cautious optimism is returning to the waterfront. State wildlife officials have already given preliminary approval for a limited, highly regulated reopening of the fishery, with a final decision expected in November 2025. If all goes well, the first legal harvest in years could happen as early as January 2026. Beyond the oyster. As devastating as the oyster crisis was, it forced the town to look beyond its most famous export and rediscover all the other culinary treasures it had to offer. Because the truth is, the oysters were only ever the beginning of the story. The same pristine bay and rich Gulf waters also provide some of the best shrimp, crab, grouper, and snapper you will ever taste. The working waterfront is still here. Shrimpers, whose families have also worked these waters for generations, head out into the Gulf and return with sweet, succulent shrimp that go from the boat to your plate in a matter of hours. Local chefs, who are fiercely passionate about their home, build menus that are basically love letters to the region's bounty. You'll find seafood shacks serving a perfect basket of fried shrimp with nothing but a lemon wedge and a view of the water. You'll find elegant dining rooms where chefs transform local grouper into masterpieces. This isn't about fancy techniques or exotic ingredients, it's about honesty. It's about letting the incredible freshness of the seafood do all the talking. It's a culinary scene that's as authentic and resilient as the town itself. The taste of triumph. To truly understand this place, you have to taste it. You have to sit at a weathered picnic table, feel the salty air on your face, and eat a meal pulled from these waters. When you do, you're not just tasting seafood. You're tasting the history of this place. You're tasting the legacy of that great port city and the echoes of the cotton and timber booms. You're tasting the decades of hard work from generations of oystermen and shrimpers. You're tasting the heartbreak of the collapse and the fierce, stubborn hope of the recovery. Each bite of perfectly grilled grouper or sweet, fresh shrimp is a taste of this community's unbreakable spirit. It's a flavor enriched by a story of struggle, survival, and a town that fought for its soul and is winning. Conclusion. So this is why the seafood in this tiny Florida town is worth more than gold. Gold is just a metal. It's valuable, sure, but it has no heart. The seafood here is different. Its value comes from the story it carries. It represents the pride of a historic port, the richness of an incredible ecosystem, and the resilience of a community that stared down collapse and is fighting its way back. It just goes to show you that the best things in life are rarely the most famous. They're often hidden, waiting to be discovered. They are the places with soul, the food with a story, and the people with the grit to protect it all. The story of Apalachicola is still being written. The best way to support this incredible community is to go and see it for yourself. Visit the historic town, walk the quiet streets, and most importantly, eat at the local restaurants. Support the fishermen and the businesses that are the lifeblood of this coast. If you've ever been to a place with a story this powerful, tell us about it in the comments below. And don't forget to share this video so more people can discover the true treasure of Florida's forgotten coast.